Yo, guys, it's Kyle coming at you from Bane's Film Reviews. Today, I'm sitting down with Sean Crampton, the writer, producer, and star of a fantastic film that I just had the opportunity to watch called The Stalking Fields. It touches on PTSD in a lot of different ways and ways that you don't often see in film. And I think it does a really good job of depicting it on screen in a respectful and appropriate way while still maintaining a really badass series of action sequences that I thought was really, really cool. So Sean, thank you so much for sitting down with me. And what's been going on?
Hey man, thanks a lot. Happy to be here. Yeah, I mean, a lot's been going on. Been busy since the Stalking Fields, but I started writing that in 2015, and then Jordan and I started writing it together in about 2017. Shot it
Okay.
in 2019 and 20, and then the pandemic slowed things down quite a bit. But as you may know, like the producer's job is just to overcome all the no's that come with me. So we had lots of opportunities to sink the ship, and we just kept moving forward, and here we are, 7 years later.
That's such a long process, but it has to be rewarding that it
Yeah.
finally came out and it was so good. So
Oh, thank you so much, man. Personally, I feel really rewarded with what we accomplished.
mhm.
People on set, the way we certainly weren't perfect, but the way we ran set and treated our artists, I find to be different than the typical experience. And the fact that we shot principal photography for $95,000, I don't think many people can comprehend what we did there.
Yeah.
You might be shoot a movie cheap, and you might just get the action, or you might just get the writing or the acting. But I feel like we at least did a good job in all those sectors, if not a great job in some.
Mhm.
So I'm very proud of the effort we put into it. So anything that comes with the result is like icing on the cake, because I really realized through producing these last few movies after that you spend more time making the picture than you do watching and celebrating it. So
Mhm.
you might as well make sure that process is enjoyable one. And yeah, so that's where I'm at, brother.
Very, very cool. Yeah, you should definitely be proud of yourselves because, like I said, I thought it was a great film, and I have to be honest. When I first started it, um, I just kind of the vibes I was getting, I was like, oh, maybe they're going to depict PTSD in a way that I'm not going to like too much. And then you immediately flip the script, and it's so well done and it's so respectful. Um,
Thank
yeah, of course. And then I want to backtrack real fast because I want to know how you got into film in the first place.
you. Oh, great question. So I grew up in San Diego. My dad was a Navy SEAL for 30 years. And just to contextualize the Stocking Fields and this, but even though he was like a Spartan essentially, I had always found film to be like my babysitter and kind of my beacon of creativity and hope as a young kid. And I think because my dad was gone so much, the acting was there early because I'm like, well, he can't ignore a movie star, and so from a very young age, I was already like in the storytelling process. I always knew I was coming to LA. Like it was weird when I
Mhm.
really think about it, and especially as I get to know other people, I'm like, oh, you didn't just like know. And not that to just say that was easy, right? Like all of a sudden, I'm
Yeah.
graduating college, looking down the barrel of a lifelong dream or sort of story I've been telling. Like I'm going
Mhm.
to LA, and then the reality is very different. Still came here, but that's essentially in a nutshell how I got my start. Is like I loved it. It was a babysitter in a lot of ways. Film. It's funny. I tell people like John Claude Van Damme movies are the thing that got me into film, like Lionheart, Kickboxer, Bloodsport. But you wouldn't necessarily call KCVD like the man in acting, even though he's good for what he does. But it's just funny, it wasn't Schindler's List that got me into film. But I've since found my appreciation for everything. And yeah, after college, I went to UC Santa Barbara, and I was like piecemealing. Like I would do a class here, and I'd always get really good feedback. Like, wow, you have something, from the teacher. And so it kind of was like my torch through high school, where I focused more on athletics and academics because I realized, well, there's only some periods of life where you're going to have this kind of support from a public school around something, and I can
Mm.
act forever. So I really just focused on trying to enjoy my life because I saw a history of young people in Hollywood having a bad time as an adult. And I was like, man, I bet if I come in more as a whole person, I'm going to have a better experience, success or not. And I'm glad I chose that route.
Yeah, I think that's very smart because, like you said, you see a lot of these people that have succeeded and they've been these stars as children, and they grow up as adults and they don't know anything else, and they don't know how to cope with not having everything they had as kids. So
Yeah, they don't person outside of it.
yeah, yeah. And then as far as this film, the Stalking Fields, where did the idea come from? Why was it so important to? I'm kind of sensing that maybe your dad had something to do with it. Where did the idea for like this sort of post-military adventure come from, and why was it so important to depict these characters with PTSD?
Yeah, great question again. Um, as the war wore on, and I'm in the community, like I'm not a Navy SEAL, by God, but you grow up around it, you're ingratiated, and I saw guys I know come back completely different,
Mm.
and the difference not in the way Hollywood was showing me. And then I'd talk to my dad. Um, and he would say the same thing. He'd basically be like, look, when we see the SEALs who have PTSD, it's not like Hollywood. It's like behavioral avoidance, which is like you get into a car accident, you don't want to drive anymore. For an operator, that's you get in battle, you don't want to fight anymore. And so Jordan and I were just kind of sitting with that idea. And he has military connections. He's very close with his grandfather, who I think runs Fort Benning in Georgia or something like that. But we both had these roots where we wanted to tell it properly, but also not make it such a somber piece. Like military people, in my experience, are very gallows humor, because they don't want, if you're too close to it, to the reality, then you can't really fight. And
Mm.
so as we sat with that question, and we had the luxury and retrospective time, we started in 2015, started shooting it in 2019. So the material sort of sat with us. We put it down for sure. We had investors fall out. We put it down, like things happen. And we just wanted to sort of Trojan horse this conversation a bit more. And it was a challenge because our DP, Nick Acosta, who I hired, I knew could do action very cheap. And so I was
Mm.
just like, maybe this typically wouldn't be the budget for an action movie, but let's see.
Yeah.
And, it's very close to me. My dad has actually, he killed himself from PTSD this year. And
Oh wow,
so,
I'm so sorry.
yeah, man, it was, luckily I'm in all sorts of therapy beforehand.
Mm.
And, but it was a total shock to our family and the community. And it's a trip, I was like, I wouldn't say day to day working on it with him, but I would call and ask, and we talk things out. And so the film's very dear to me in that sense. And it's a trip when I look back at my own artistry. I'm like, damn, in one way or another, I've been writing about PTSD in its many forms my whole career. Um, yeah, it happened this year, or April 2022. My dad passed, and it's a total trip, man. So I don't even really know how to contextualize all of that, except that that's what happened.
Mm.
And Jordan, I mean, everybody's proud of what we did, but
Yeah.
we hope, our ultimate hope is like it's a conversation starter, like
Yeah.
things happen. As my dad died, the military was there. they called it a KIA, which is interesting. I know it's benefit dependent, but it's like already you see the sweeping under the rug, right? And
Hmm.
my reason I'm so open is like, yeah, suicide's fucking heavy,
Yeah.
and we don't need an emotionless conversation about it yet in this country, where we can just like talk about it.
Yeah.
And so, just doing my piece from my perspective and my experience.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. But I think that the Stalking Fields in some ways pays homage to your dad, and I'm sure that he'd be very proud of what you're able to put on screen and depict for people that are struggling with that. So kudos to you again, and it's unfortunate that it had to happen that way, but I think he'd be very proud of you.
Thank you. I feel the same. You know,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
feel. I appreciate that.
good, of course. Um, and then so your character Woodman is like a loose cannon in one moment, and then the next he's very calm and cool and level headed, and that seems at such a wide range to be able to attack from second to second and frame to frame. How do you go about channeling all of these emotions like that and being able to change back and forth so frequently?
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I would call myself like a filmmaker now, but when I moved to LA, it was for acting, and
Hmm.
obviously I love to act. It's like it's what I get to express emotions I necessarily wasn't able to as a
Hmm.
young man, and not only express them but sort of be rewarded in that. Whereas like writing is like my ideas, and
Hmm.
producing my managerial OCD, leadership style. And so for that, I'm bringing this all to answer your question, is when I first moved to LA, I was just obsessive. And so I went to acting school for almost 5 years. And I don't know, like, truthfully, anybody who pushed themselves as hard as I did. And the reward of that was knowing a great technique for myself, and also being able to experiment with the bifurcating producing, writing, and acting at the same time. Because by the time I got to Stocking Fields, I'd probably done 100 short films
Hmm.
and either produced it or edited it or shot it or did the sound horribly, any number of like fucking mistakes that aren't even released because they were just that bad. But by the time I got to Stocking Fields, I really understood, like, because one of the biggest gaffes people make when they start to multi hyphenate is they don't prepare the thing they started with. So for me as an actor, if I started to direct, I wouldn't prepare the acting part as much because I'm like, oh, dude, I'm directing. I should know it. It'll be fine. And what I learned before Stocking Fields, thankfully, is no, you need to prepare the acting part more because your ego is saying, you got it. So you almost need to dive in harder. So on Stocking Fields, I was there, and as
Hmm.
one of the writers, I was also literally like crafting it towards me. So that those things really helped. And also, like, my dad, was a great reference. If you met him, you never know he was a SEAL.
Okay.
It was just like, and then when his emotions got up, it was like a fucking Viking on Ragnarok. And so it would be like a boom. And so I was just kind of playing with that template as well. And it was just far more interesting of a performance to do just for me in general. Something I learned early on from another director. He's like, you want to give actors a meal. Like, you want something they all can sink their teeth into. And so we did our best to give every actor in that, it's like a 13-person cast, really, at the end of the day,
Mm.
a meal track they can really like push themselves to. And so that applied to me as well.
Very, very cool. And I again, I think it comes through very well. And I think that you were successful in your endeavors in acting in the film as well. So,
Thank you. I appreciate that.
of course. And then there's a couple different things that stood out to me that I found unique. They were unique choices, in my opinion, but they work. The one thing was that we often cut to wildlife. You see birds in the trees, and kind of everything slows down, everything calms, and you're just focused on that wildlife in this very like serene setting, and you'd never know these other things were taking place around them. And then the other was Taylor's eyes. I feel like a lot of times she's almost staring into the camera, and she has these bright blue eyes, and they also kind of represent this sense of like innocence and struggle, and again sort of separating you from these things that are happening on screen outside of the frame. And I'm curious why you chose to include those things, and why those choices were so important to you.
No, I love the questions. I'll start with your last question first. Taylor was one of our first hires. I experimented in the hiring process. I basically interviewed every department head and actor beforehand, or I knew them, because I knew we were going to be in the shit, and I just wanted to know what people are going to be like before that. And Taylor, I had went to acting school with,
Okay.
and so she's fucking phenomenal. She's great.
Mm.
And then Costa, our DP. So basically, part of my experiment was to hire indie directors in different positions, because I knew if they could get out of their ego, they knew how to accomplish an indie film, because it's really hard to see something to the finish line. So I did that in 3 positions, and one of them was the DP, Nick Acosta, who's a true G for genius. So he was always talking about the eyes. So I have to give him credit and decisive, because I basically was like, once I hired him, and I had known him a long time too, I let him go. I was like, do you, why we're here, to contribute and collaborate. That's one of my favorite parts of the process, is like, what's your idea? Great. Here's mine on top of that. Oh, great. And then all of a sudden we stack to this amazing idea. So he was focusing on a lot of eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Even like my character, there's like almost no highlight until the end when his soul starts to come out.
Mm-hmm.
So the medium length answer to that. And then with the wildlife, Rudy, our editor and producer, who's just like this beautiful artist, like such a deep thinker, deep connector. We had found this blue jay like through line through the film. And originally in an old opening that didn't make the cut, we start the whole film with the blue jay. And then the gunshot releases the bird into flight, and we're into the movie. Sort of like the storm, and it's also connecting Woodman's call sign, which is the blue jay, and the blue jay against about like good and peace, means things. And so once we lost the opening, because we chose that more dynamic opening to kind of get us into the feel, we had to lose the blue jay. So what we did was we interlaced the audio, so you hear the blue jay calling in the opening first, and then it's kind of like this fun through line through the movie. But yeah, it's also a nice respite, because sometimes you don't have a B or C storyline going. And we love symbology and thematics, and our re-recording mixer, Patrick Sexton, who I don't know if you listen to it in 5.1 surround, but he crushed the sound design. I mean, he did such a phenomenal job. But he was like, all right, he's like, this is where the Blue Jays sound. Like, he knew the region they were from, and like, it was just incredible. So again, sort of a long answer to that, but that's why we chose those particular things.
Yeah, very, very cool. I made sure to mention those in the review because they really, really stood out to me. I thought they worked very well. I think they were important to the story. And then, like you mentioned, like the B and the C storyline, and something I don't remember if I actually wrote it in the review or not. But whenever you see these war films or the films similar to the Stalking Fields, I always hate when there's like a romance involved, because I feel like it steals from that story. I always go back to Pearl Harbor. That's like my reference for that. Like, what could have been a great movie ends up kind of being a piece of garbage because of this ridiculous love triangle. But I think that your romance and your love story in that supplements the story. It doesn't steal from it. It coexists very well. And I don't know if I mentioned that or not, so I wanted to mention it now, because that was something I noticed, and I thought it was really well done.
Oh, thank you. I think you did mention it, and I appreciate that
Okay.
because, yeah, it's also the experience of like deployed men and women, right? Like, you're not romantic. Like, frankly, most military relationships are fractured and horrendous. And I was just like, what is he like? I love when my characters are wrong. So
Yeah.
he's ideal, right? That's all idyllic. Like it's fantasy. Like you're seeing her in beauty shots and da da da. But that's his memory of her. That's his reason. So functionally, she gives him a drive. And in the gun range scene, you understand why he goes to the program
Mhm.
because she brings it up. And it's kind of like the last thing he can hold on to is this connection with her. And so we just kind of use it as more conduits rather than a focus because that's not like PTSD is an isolatory experience, it seems like,
Mhm.
I think
Yeah, yeah.
it to a degree, not just in the military sort of galvanized the term because it's super severe, but that's my 2 cents. And also since my father, I sort of realized like military operators typically had trauma before they got into like what caused you to want to go kill people across the world, like you're
Mhm.
running from something. So I was also bringing like what was Woodman's prior like, so those are the kind of layers we were playing with there. I appreciate you taking notice of that.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I'm glad that I picked up on things that you actually tried to accomplish, and these weren't just things that I noticed that were bullshit. So, so that's good. Uh,
uh, we play with like, I mean, it was a weird situation. It was the pandemic. So our director, he had to move back to Texas. So it was me and Rudy editing the film, and then Jordan when he was in town because he shoots all the time. And he was there for a majority of it, so I don't want to sound like he wasn't, but he was off and on.
mhm.
So it was we were figuring it out, but it was such a good educator for me because like with Kyle's character line, the one,
Mhm.
like if you study that, if you watch it again, like he's telling you what's up in every scene and every action he does. In fact, the first shot you see of him is Dutch and he's half covered. And
Okay.
we're there, hey, pay attention. And so I love stuff like that when I watch films. So it's fun to sort of employ tactics there and also see what people, that's another thing I'm learning in this process is like I could never guess what stands out to you. Sometimes people are like this, and I'm like, really? That's oh cool, great. Because I thought it would be these things. So it's been an amazing experience in that regard as well.
Yeah, that's the thing I like about film a lot. It's all subjective. No two people are going to get exactly the same thing from the same film. So I really enjoy that about it. And I'd like people to be able to watch the Stalking Fields and experience what I did. So where can everybody find it?
The two primary providers, I mean, there's like a list of 30 we're getting from Gravitas, but the two primary are Apple iTunes and Amazon. You'll be able to rent or buy it anywhere, essentially. YouTube. Yeah, we're excited for the 17th. Yeah, man. Like, no matter what happens, I'm proud. And I'm also ready to move forward. It's been 7 years. So it's nice to kind of put her down for a minute.
Yeah, very, very nice. And then I'm curious what you're working on now.
Yeah, so in 2022, I directed a pilot episode that I was hired to write and produce. So that just finished post and it's being circulated right now in the industry, and I'm very excited about that. It's called Helmet, and
Okay.
it's about basically these tow yard wars in the late 70s in LA, where towing vehicles was so lucrative that folks started killing each other over it over like essentially like gangs.
Wow.
And think about it, it's like all these unhinged Vietnam vets coming back. And so we're putting a little hyperbole in it to make it more dramatic for storytelling. But so that's something exciting. And then at the end of the year, I produced a film called Good Bad Things. which is a total shift genre wise. It's more, coming of age, young adolescent, heartbreak, and learning to love oneself. And our lead has muscular dystrophy, meaning he can't, aside from functionality like breathing, looking, talking, his tongue, he can't move many muscles in his body. And what was exciting about that project, aside from this amazing cast, was the challenge of a sit and talk movie, right? Because we just did the Stalking Fields and
Mm.
Helmet, and my film The Wheel I did in 2020 was more active. So that was a challenge. And then what I find to be a bit of a bummer in Hollywood right now is the way diversity is shown. It's like, let me be diverse at the sake of the storytelling, not let's
Mm.
just be like the BBC is just diverse. They're just diverse. They don't have to explain it or fucking highlight it with it's just like it is. And so that's what I really loved about this. It's a movie about a guy coming to love himself who happens to have muscular dystrophy and not the
Mm.
other way around. And what I really loved about that was when there were times to show the effect of the disability, we did. But we weren't leaning into it, making you like beating the shit out of you with this disability. It's about the human element, which for me is my number one. Every director or investor I ever talked to, I'm like, story above everything. And so I'm really proud of that. And it's similar to Stocking Fields, where we're seeing rough cuts and we're very proud and excited, but
Mm.
the experience was amazing. We did 2 to 4 day work weeks. We did 12-hour days max. Like, I'm just done beating the shit out of my artists. Um, and that's the approach. So I'm really excited about the whole sphere of filmmaking for me.
Yeah, very, very cool. And then I want to backtrack real fast because I completely agree
Yeah.
with your comment about them beating the shit out of diversity in Hollywood. And that's one of my
Yeah.
biggest complaints. And I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point, putting it in my reviews again and again and again. Like I'm sick and tired of them saying like this is why this story is supposed to work because it's diverse. No, they're diverse and they
Yeah.
bring something unique to the story, and I appreciate that. But you don't need to shove it down the viewer's throat. Um,
I agree. And I think it's actually counterproductive to
mm,
people they're trying to lift up.
mm,
It's it's like, no, you just like once it's just is, that's true acceptance.
yeah, yeah. And then my last question for you: what are some of your favorite films?
Oh, great question. Well, wow. I saw Mad Max Fury Road 4 times in theaters because
Okay.
it's an epic operatic experience. I skipped going to see the Vatican in Italy to go to the Dark Knight world premiere. Uh, Not like no one was there, but like there was opening, and I
Mm,
bought tickets Italian for me and my friends, and they're like, "Dude, you're not going to see the Sistine Chapel?" I was like, "The photos they get up there better than I can." Like we had been through Europe for like 2 months, and I was just like, so those have to be up there. The Prestige, I think, is just such a brilliant Chris Nolan piece of filmmaking because if you really, really watch it many times, you start to understand who Christian Bale is playing in each scene. And once you start to unravel that layering as an actor, it's kind of mind blowing because you're like, he's that guy. Oh, and he knows it. And so that was a real educator for me. But I'm all over the place. I love Amelie, the French film. I love John Cassavetes. I love Jenna Rowland, the '70s, like A Woman Under the Influence with Peter Falk. Like, holy
mm.
shit, that dinner scene sacrifice. So it just depends. There's just Blood Diamond. I've watched probably like 20 times.
Wow.
Yeah, I love it. I'll watch. There's certain films I'll just watch all day. There's a ton of good movies that came out this year as well, but that's kind of how I like what brings me back to the theater many times is sort of my indicator.
Hmm.
Was it the Tarantino movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Like I
Hmm.
watched that times in theater. It was just a master class on filmmaking. Um, yeah, that's where I'm at with them. Yeah.
Very, very cool. That's my favorite question. It's my wife's favorite question, so I'll keep asking it even if I stop liking it. But um,
Yeah.
but again, thank you so much, Sean, for taking some time to sit down with me and talk about your fantastic film. I appreciate you being so open and honest and everything. And again, I had a great time and truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you, man.
You are more than welcome. You have a great day.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.
See ya.